Hello, and welcome to Planetside 2. In the last episode, we covered everything you need to know to be decent in-ground vehicles. But what if some pesky aircraft is being a nuisance, and every time you get close to killing them, they simply fly away? In this situation, the only thing you can do is clear your airspace with your own aircraft. Or, maybe you notice that the enemy doesn't have any anti-air options, and you wish to exploit that weakness. This is where air vehicles come into play. This episode is going to follow the same formula as my last episode, but there are only going to be 3 sections. First, we're going to recap on the fundamentals of positioning and once again elaborate on the slight differences when applying these core concepts to the air game. Second, we're going to revisit the concept of projectile velocity and leading your target, because it is paramount in doing well in aircraft and also surviving. Third, we're going to talk about vehicle orientation and directional armor for team play. Okay, so let's start things off by recapping the 5 fundamental rules of positioning and how they apply to aircraft. First, be aware of enemy locations. Now, this is different again for aircraft. Not only do you need to be aware of what's happening on the ground, but you also need to be aware of what's happening in the immediate airspace around you, as well as what's happening in neighboring territories. In order to do this, you need to use 3 in-game options in tandem. First, you can utilize your third-person camera to get a wider angle on the battlefield, and you'll also be able to get a better idea of where incoming fire is coming from. Second, you can utilize your free view while you're in your cockpit to assess the battlefield and your airspace and spot any threats without changing your vehicle's orientation. Third, you can use the map screen to get an idea of which territories have high concentrations of enemies in them. But why is knowing what's happening in neighboring facilities important? Well, in the same way that the scale of your engagements is larger in ground vehicles relative to infantry, aircraft combat is at a larger scale still, and can easily spill over into adjacent facilities or even span the entire continent. Second, finding cover is again different in air vehicles. You can abuse line of sight around terrain just like you can playing anything else in the game, but that's not your primary cover. Aircraft rely primarily on their speed to duck in and out of the effective range of enemy weapons. Remember, surface-to-air missiles and base flak defenses have a hard limit to their effective range, and rangers and skyguards are limited by their relatively slow projectile velocity, so primarily use range as your cover. Third, you can't really slice the pie when you're in an aircraft, but you can apply the principle all the same. The principle is, you want to limit the amount of damage you're taking while freely delivering all of your damage potential. This can be achieved in 2 ways depending on which targets you're attacking. First, when you're attacking ground targets, you can use your speed and agility to deliver your payload and then simply break line of sight by flying behind terrain, or simply get out of the effective range of enemy weapons. Second, when attacking enemy aircraft, you should try to approach from above or from behind. Unlike ground vehicles, aircraft can't simply rotate their turrets 360 degrees to fight back. They need to physically maneuver the entire aircraft to face you, which takes time, and in that time, you can be dishing out all of your damage. However, what happens if you find a fight where there are multiple enemy aircraft? There are 2 things you can do to try to successfully isolate and kill them. First, you can wait until one gets separated from the herd due to needing to resupply or repair, and that's your opportunity to ambush them. Or second, you can harass one from a great distance to try to tease their formation and isolate a single pilot. If you see multiple pilots turn to engage you, simply retreat and try again until you bait one sufficiently far away from his friends that you have time to kill them. Okay, going back to positioning rules, the 4th is always have an escape plan. Again, this is different when attacking ground targets or other aircraft. When fighting ground targets, as mentioned previously, you can simply use mountains or other terrain to block line of sight after you deliver your payload. However, when you're fighting enemy aircraft, your safe zone options are quite limited. You can't really use range to escape because they are just as fast as you, and you can't use terrain to block line of sight because they can just fly around it. So what can you do? Your only real option is to use friendly anti-air or friendly aircraft as a screen, which again comes down to understanding what is present on the battlefield. But more often than not, you simply don't have a safe zone once engaged with an enemy aircraft. Your safe zone is your pre-planning and decision-making before the engagement. Fifth, Don't get tunnel vision. Now, this has already sort of been covered in the third rule about isolating your enemy, except you need to look at it from the other perspective. If you're the one being harassed at range, don't get baited away from your friendly aircraft. Stay where you're safe, because again, staying alive should always take precedent over getting kills when you're in a vehicle. Okay, moving on, let's talk again about projectile velocity and leading your target. Now, it's true that aircraft weapons don't have the same slow velocity as ground vehicles, but aircraft also travel much faster than ground vehicles, and the ranges you'll be engaging at are also significantly larger than ground vehicle engagements, which means leading your target is even more important when flying. The best advice I can give to intermediate pilots is don't aim in a straight line in front of your target. Instead, try to understand how your target is moving and try to aim where you think they will be in the amount of time it takes your bullets to get to them. You can use your enemy's contrails or smoke trails if you've damaged them to help you predict their movements. You can also pay close attention to their engines to see if they're using their afterburners or not to gauge how fast they are moving. Okay, so lastly let's talk about team play oriented aircraft and how to pilot those effectively. I will be covering each vehicle in its own independent video, but just to get you started, there are a few general things you should know. First, both the Valkyrie and the Liberator have directional armor like a tank, but it works slightly differently. Instead of taking bonus damage to the sides or rear, they take reduced damage from the bottom. The Valkyrie takes 50% less damage from the bottom, and the Liberator takes 20% less damage. You can really abuse this damage reduction by always pointing your belly towards incoming damage. Secondly, not only do you want to point your belly towards enemies because it reduces your damage taken from them, but that's also the viewing angle for your primary weapon. The Valkyrie's primary weapon is oriented at the front and pointing down, whilst the Liberator's primary weapon is located at the back and pointing down. Lastly, the Liberator's nose gun can be aimed independently of the vehicle by using free look, whereas in an ESF, the gun will remain pointing forward even if you look away. If you're finding that flying solo sucks and you're getting destroyed, you can always ask friendly aircraft that you come across if they'd like to team up. Chances are they feel the same way as you do and would rejoice at the prospect of having a wingman. You can simply do this by holding down your spot key while looking at them and sending them a friendly message. Okay guys, that does it for the core mechanics of infantry, vehicle, and aircraft gameplay. The next episodes are going to start delving into each class, and then each vehicle, and we'll start looking at what builds are strong and serve useful purposes on the battlefield. I hope you join me in the next episode where we'll start looking at the infiltrator class.